Welcome to The Rounds, our roundtable events where we discuss emerging and disruptive technologies and trends. If you're a strategic business or technology leader and are building competitive advantage, you're in the right place. We regularly bring together top-end user and vendor executives to share their perspectives and real-world expertise. Today's discussion focuses on the rationale for clouds and cloud-critical success factors. Joining us along with our host, Cal Braunstein, CEO and Executive Director of Research at Robert Francis Group, are Carlos Pereira, Distinguished Systems Engineer, Worldwide DC and Cloud at Cisco, Diogenes Ritori, OpenShift Product Manager at Red Hat, Joe McKenna, former VP Distributed Hosting Architecture and Engineering at Fidelity Investments, and Jeff Schaefer, Senior Technical Staff Member, Chief Security Architect, Cloud Managed Services at IBM.
If we step back and you look at the policies and you look at the issues that you talk about with growth and trying to build a strategy, it really does require somebody to step back and not just say, clouds are good, let me go over and save money. It says, I really need to really start at the highest level and search your way down through this.
I think we should not forget that policies should not prohibit experimentation and prohibit innovation, right? So, because if you start to add more policies, you start to damage the ability for one to try or to innovate.
So let me try to rephrase what I mean. Policy doesn't mean a restriction.
Okay.
Policy, for instance, policy is just how you define the operational model. Let me give you an example. When you classical look of the traditional environments, they're all driven about how I configure stuff. When you're moving towards a policy that defines adoption of cloud, you're talking about how I consume the resource, as opposed to how I configure the resource. It's not a restrictive.
Yeah.
It's just you take an application-centric perspective or workloads, as you said. This workload or this particular application can actually move to the cloud because I will consume that. And the restriction may come from what you said before. I will restrict the consumption up to the level that my storage doesn't go beyond that level, as you said before.
So we've got the operations folks and the development folks deciding how to do things, but security and the CSIO and all those issues have to flow in as well. So how do they play into this, making it happen?
Sure, so I think it goes back to what he kind of started to say. It's a matter of having the right policies and standards in place that allow you to understand what types of data, what types of workload would be allowed in a cloud at all, and ensuring that that's understood by operations and development, and having it be realistic. So a lot of organizations have trouble actually identifying and tagging what data is actually sensitive and maybe shouldn't belong in a cloud versus should.
And from the dev side, if I follow up what he said, there are the traditional workloads that were built many years ago that some people try to call them legacy or monolithic. They still find they run a lot of the business sustainable. And there is the full cloud native that are built only on the cloud, on new technology, new microservices approach. There is somewhere in the middle, which refers to his piece. I can front end something on the cloud because of scaling, but I have my data over here. So there is this cloud native kind, which can be a managed services approach or a hybrid cloud native. You know, there is a lot of semantics that you can throw over this. The whole point is it just represents a transition. I run my business on the traditional. I'm more efficient on something at scale, on a microservices based running eventually on a cloud operational model. We can run into a public cloud or on-prem. It's all about the operational model, not necessarily the location you are. And there is something in between. You may need to scale just the front end to consume social media while your back end has restricted data you can't move. So that's a transition period that a lot of the operation guys are facing. The developers are ahead because they need to think about how can offer, but the ops guys are the ones that need to stick to the policy. That's why having those policies defined before you go to the cloud and try to rush it afterwards is important.
You hit on a topic, and as I go through that, I hear a process impact, right? If I ran my shop in a particular fashion, no matter how automated I am, no matter how good my processes are, I know how I run from development all the way through to operations and the new versioning cycle. But now I'm going to have some things out on the cloud, and as I change my process to do that, I may have data in the cloud, I may have data on my own site, just the apps out there. I may be doing my dev test on the cloud, but then as it comes in-house, I may have to redo all these tests again because the interfaces aren't all the same for my production systems as for my unit test systems. So the whole process changes, and you mentioned, Jeff, standardization, driving standards. This ties to that, and do you let moving the cloud drive the standards, or do you fix your process or define your process first and then try to make the move? So it would play.
I think you need to do both, absolutely, but I think what we historically see is standards, because they're internal, they are perhaps more easily to have exceptions to or relaxed, and people end up doing their own thing. So I think you have to do both. Set the standards and then give them the cloud platforms that won't say enforce, but provide only the sets of platforms that you want folks to be using.
But Joe, I know you've done this. So what did you learn as you went through this that you'd say, okay, if I were to redo this now, what would I do first, second, and third, so that I don't get caught in particular traps as I move to the cloud?
So, we allowed certain flexibility when we first built our, first cloud, and cut some corners, and then we paid for that as we wanted to get toward production. Management saying, okay, you got this going, you're getting people to use it, let's get some production workloads on it. Well, we hadn't quite taken care of this security concern or that. I think as you look at it, setting that policy of how you expect to do it, and then really understanding how you're going to deliver that in an environment that's extremely dynamic, variable usage, and the number of instances that you're managing go up by an order of magnitude is typically what they've seen. We've easily doubled, more than doubled the number of OSs we manage, in the environment by doing cloud, because it's easier to get them and to go. So now when you have to patch them and there's a security breach, what's the process around that? So I think looking at how people use the cloud, there's infrastructure as a service, and then there's the platform as a service. When you're talking about infrastructure as a service, I'm just giving you, here's the OS. What do? They treat it like some of the traditional legacy work, and they're manually building those workloads, deploying those workloads. So when it comes time to make a change to that environment, you just don't spin up a new OS because they built everything manually. Mm-hmm. We had to figure out how to patch that environment. That'd be things that I'd attack more aggressively and say, automation is the key here for our success. Even though I've automated giving you the infrastructure, you didn't automate the work that you were doing on your side, therefore locking you into our older, more standard ways. If you're really going to make a change here and look back at this, what do we do for the automation to deliver that and do that from the application dev side?
And this situation is going to scale much more, because you mentioned platform as a service, and if you consider the container-based platform as a service, your container is now your virtual machine. Yours is now your OS. So you are moving from a one virtual machine, or let's say for your application, with now putting 50, 100, 200 containers inside one virtual machine. And each of these containers, they're all sharing the life cycle. They all have their own life cycle. They all have to maintain and control and keep the security compliant for all those dependencies that are in their container. So let's say the problem of not having automation, that's going to scale to an unprecedented level.
Thanks for watching, and please join us for our continued discussion on cloud computing on our next release. If you are interested in seeing more cloud-related content, have comments or questions for our guests, want input from us about the topics we discussed today, would like to participate as a guest on the rounds, or have anything else you want to share, you can do so using our social media as described in the accompanying graphic. And please comment, rate, and subscribe. We'll see you next time on The Rounds.